Thank you, and now we'll take the vote at the end of regular business. Orders of the day.
Ballot item number 6, M20, second reading of Bill 20, an act respecting the City of Toronto, the Ontario Municipal Board. Mr. Marchese.
The member for Trinity-Spadina.
Do I have to move my bill? It's moved. Mr. Speaker, I move second reading of Bill 20, an act respecting the City of Toronto and the Ontario Municipal Board.
Here, here. Mr. Marchese has moved second reading of Bill 20, an act respecting the City of Toronto and the Ontario Municipal Board. Pursuant to Standing Order 98, you have 12 minutes for your presentation.
Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to speak to this bill because I think it's a timely one. People have been waiting for this kind of a bill for a long time. I know that many people in Ontario are arguing we should get rid of the Ontario Municipal Board. I would be a proponent of that, and if the government were to move such a motion, you would find me supporting it. But that's not what my bill does. What my bill does today, and by the way, it's called an act respecting the City of Toronto and the Ontario Municipal Board. What it does is to free Toronto from the OMB. It exempts Toronto from the Ontario Municipal Board's oversight. That's what it does, and that's why the people that are in these galleries are here today. And I was going to name them all, but I won't do that because it'll take too long. I just want to thank them for being here because these people, these citizens, have been fighting the OMB for a long, long time. Many of them are part of residents' associations, a few of them are architects, and many are just good, strong, active citizens wanting to do the right thing. What does the OMB do? The Ontario Municipal Board settles land use disputes having to do with minor bylaw changes and/or bigger changes, major rezoning. That's basically what they do. And who are these people? Well, there are 25 of them, appointed by governments, whoever is in government at the time, and they are unelected and unaccountable. And in my view, and in the view of many Torontonians, this is a serious problem. The OMB is a gladiatorial place. What does it mean? Well, it's about having developers who have a lot of money to hire good planners, good lawyers, great lawyers that can be paid $1,000 an hour, versus cash-strapped citizens that, yes, can afford to pay the $120 fee, that's not the problem, but don't have the money to be able to hire lawyers or the time to be able to defend themselves, and overworked planners. Who do you think is going to win that fight? Which gladiator is going to win that one? My money, and I'm not a gambling man, my money is on the developers with the deep pockets. And they are the ones who win most of the time. A paper presented at the Canadian Political Science Association conference in 2009, studying the period of the years 2000 to 2006, found that when developers and the city faced off at the OMB, developers emerged victorious 64% of the time. You get the picture, right? It's the people with money that tend to win, just the way the system works. It's not a level playing field. It can never be a level playing field. My bill would exempt Toronto from the OMB's oversight, and it would have the power to establish an appeal body should the City of Toronto decide to do that. There was a motion passed at City Hall last February, and the motion basically says what I am presenting here today. And that motion to exempt Toronto from the OMB was supported by 34 councillors and opposed by 5. That tells you there is strong support at the city level for the city to be able to have the power to be exempted from the OMB. I know that Minister Murray supports this because I've seen the letter that he sent to the minister. I know that there are probably many members in the City of Toronto that are likely to support this. This is good. I believe it speaks to the pressure that we've all been getting in the City of Toronto to make sure that the party that should have a say is the city and not some unelected individual that makes choices around development, that makes decisions around development. I want to quote something from Minister Gerritsen, because in 2005, when the bill was actually proclaimed, I think, or passed in 2007, they wanted to put power back in the hands of cities, something the Tories love. And I'm hoping to hear from them, because from the House leaders' comments on my bill, I wasn't sure whether you folks might be supporting, but you find people love the idea of cities having greater control of their own development. And here's what Mr. Gerritsen said. We want to put land use planning decisions back where they belong, in the hands of municipal decision makers. We want to give Ontario municipalities more power to determine what is best for their communities. That never happened. It never happened. What Bill 51 did, which was a good thing, was to do the following. The bill's amendments to the Planning Act stated that the OMB decisions would have regard to municipal decisions and plans. And so the government at the time felt that if you put in such language, having regard to, that the people at the Ontario Municipal Board who make those decisions would of course be listening to what the various cities doing planning have to say. Well, in 2009, the Ontario Divisional Court ruled that have regard to basically means nothing. The OMB only has to provide minimal deference to the municipality, the court ruled. Only minimal deference. It means, yes, we heard you, but no, we're not going to listen to you. That's all it means. It means that that individual, unelected and unaccountable, says, I heard your argument, City of Toronto. I heard the argument of the developers, and I kind of like the developers' point of view. That's basically what it means. And that's basically where they're ruling. Instead, and I want to point out, last January, the OMB cited minimal deference when it ignored the region of Waterloo's growth plan, which had been developed in consultation with the community over a decade. Instead of reflecting the community's official plan and desire to reduce urban sprawl, the OMB chose to massively increase the acreage available for development from 197 acres to 2,593 acres. It's nuts. It doesn't make any sense. The OMB decision relied on growth calculations that assumed the demand for sprawling single-family homes would continue in the future as it had in the past, as if the Places to Grow Act and the Greenbelt Act didn't exist. Sprawl in the past compelled the region of Waterloo to accept sprawl forever. Only last week, the OMB approved a high-rise development at 154 Front Street East, right in the area that made up the original Old Town of York, now the City of Toronto. The approved building was far higher than city planners had recommended. The OMB rejected the recommendations of city planners, city heritage experts, and city design review panel. The OMB ruled that since the city had allowed high-rise buildings nearby in the past, it was obliged to allow another. It doesn't make any sense. And so what you've got is planners spending a whole lot of time talking about what is essential for its city. In this particular instance, you have the city's heritage expert saying, no, we can't have this extra development, and the city design review panel agreeing with them and saying, you can't do that, but the OMB said, too bad, so sad. Well, why the heck do we need a planning department? Why don't we just get rid of the planning department of the City of Toronto and anywhere else for that matter? Because if you take this to the OMB will decide whatever they want to do. Again, it is absurd what is going on in the in relation to the OMB. I want to cite another example, which is something that my friend Catherine Naismith was here, and a letter that was signed by the by Architectural Conservatory of Ontario by Susan Radcliffe, and they're very concerned about the protecting the silhouette of this legislature. And a number of people have been fighting this for quite some time. I had a bill. The previous speaker was trying to persuade the government to express a provincial interest and did not. And so the OMB ruled on a decision regarding 21 Avenue Road that it could go ahead with that development, meaning that when you stand on College or Queen, you'll be able to see it. The OMB's ruling means that even though the City of Toronto fought against it, and even though they made changes in 2012 to the official plan amendment to protect the full silhouette, even in spite of those changes, they're likely to be taken to the OMB. The point is, it's time to give the City of Toronto the powers it needs and deserves. They are 100 and, how old are they? 129, 170, 129 years old? It's time that they be given the powers that they deserve to be able to do planning on their own without having to be overridden by an instrument.
Stop the clock.
We always invite people into the chamber to observe what's going on, but I would ask our audience not to participate.
Should stop at the city level. We need to be able to give the City of Toronto the power it needs to be able to plan its own growth. And by the way, I want to say to the member from Mississauga South, Streetville South, I believe, that if Mississauga members were to bring a motion here saying we want to be free from the OMB, I would support her as well. And if there's any other city here in Ontario that says we want to become part of this bill and there's a way that I can do that, I welcome it. Because I believe that every city that has a planning department and is willing, ready to be able to do that, I say God bless. They should have that power. So if any other member, Conservative or Liberal, wants to bring forth amendments to be able to say, I want my city to be included, I will support that. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Further debate. The Minister of Aboriginal Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm very happy to speak to this because OMB issues are a huge importance in my riding of Willowdale. And since I was elected in 2003, every week, every Friday when I'm in my constituency office and at other times during the week and in the summer, I receive calls and I do meetings and I do lots of them on all of the frustrations that the citizens of Willowdale are experiencing with the OMB. So I want to thank the member opposite for the Trinity-Spadina for bringing this private member's bill forth. And I thank him because the effect of his private member's bill is it's going to cause this chamber, on the Liberal side, the Conservative side, the NDP side, to start thinking seriously about OMB reform. This morning I see in a story in the Toronto Star, and I'm going to quote the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Minister Linda Jeffries. She said, quote, the minority Liberal government is, quote, keeping an open mind about the NDP proposal. Later on, at the end of the article makes this point. Last year, when she was Municipal Affairs and Housing Minister, referring to then Minister Wynne, now Premier Wynne, the paper goes on to say that Premier Kathleen Wynne expressed the need for changes to the OMB. So I thank the member for bringing this bill forward because it's going to engender a very serious discussion about OMB reform, and I support OMB reform. Now, I'm going to make 4 points here because there are 4 issues that everybody has to look at. First of all, whatever we do in this chamber, over 400 other municipalities in Ontario are going to look at it and say, and they're going to draw lessons from what we do with respect to the OMB in Toronto. So we have to be mindful of the rest of Ontario. Number two, if the OMB is just sort of completely abolished, wiped off the board, and the decisions on these planning issues are left to the planning departments and the city council and so on, there's always the question then is what does a ratepayer group do if they're unhappy with that decision? So right now they're unhappy with the OMB and they don't want to go there because it's very, very costly. If there's no OMB and they're unhappy with the decision, then their resort is to go through the court system. And I just caution people, if you think the OMB is expensive, you ain't seen anything yet until you get into the court system. And we're going to have a whole series of issues to deal with there. That's the second point. The third point is that it's my understanding, and I stand to be corrected on this, but one of the issues in Toronto anyway, is that in fact, when push comes to shove and you drill into it, the City of Toronto does not have an official plan. There being no official plan, there's a whole lot of interpretation as to what buildings can go up in what locations and so forth and so on. I think if there was an official plan, City of Toronto official plan, carved in stone, then the OMB, with respect to Toronto, has to follow the rules that are clearly in the Act that say the OMB can only interfere with the decision of if it's contrary in law to the Planning Act. There being no official plan in Toronto, that's one of the, maybe we should address OMB reform and address the official plan reform with respect to the City of Toronto. My last point is that as a member opposite from Trinity-Spadina has said, the buck should stop at the City of Toronto. I guess that what he means is the buck should stop with the planning department, but absent an official plan and absent an OMB, people will be driven to the courts. And as I've said, if you think OMB is expensive, wait till you get into the court. Having said that, thank you for bringing this forward. I look forward to the debate on reforming the OMB.
Thank you. Further debate, the member for Barrie.
Thank you, Speaker. First of all, I'd like to say I appreciate the member from Trinity-Spadina putting this forward. I think it's a really important thing to actually get talking about. I've been actually speaking about this since my days as a councillor in Barrie, where the OMB has had a dramatic effect on how a city's like Barrie's rapid growth has really been affected by really a board that's unelected and unaccountable, and has constantly and over again overruled duly elected officials in our own city. It is frustrating, and I can tell you firsthand as a councillor how frustrating it is when you have not only majority vote of a council, but actually in many cases unanimous vote of a council, which can be difficult to achieve at times, be overturned by a non-elected board, and in many cases, in almost all cases, a faceless board too. Many of the people who are actually making these decisions never even get to see or face the people who are overturning their decisions. It's patently unfair. I think we're one of only 2 provinces in the country that have a board that is equal to the OMB or whatever it's called in any other province. And if they can do it in other provinces without an OMB and have a good planning resource without having an OMB, then why can't we either? And so I think one thing I do see here that's very positive is I think a general recognition from all 3 parties that there needs to be a very critical and important reform of the OMB at the very least. Not just Toronto. But as my colleague from Bruce Grey Owen Sound states, not just Toronto. I mean, as you know, I'll remind everybody this isn't the province of Toronto; it's the province of Ontario. And although I respect the member's offer to put all cities into, invite all cities to join in his bill, this is something that I think needs to enjoy a much greater discussion in the political atmosphere. We need to talk to municipalities exactly about what they need. We know that many rural municipalities don't have the capacity to have, don't have the option or the resources to be able to have an appeals process for the residents, the little guy who's got a development maybe going in next door to him or across the road from him or next to their kid's school. The OMB does provide an outlet for that, an opportunity for them to actually have a say and appeal decisions that are made by their local councils. That I'm okay with. And if that can be embedded within a municipal structure, I think that's probably the best way to go about it. But that requires, I think, a very intense actual review with all the municipalities in the province of Ontario, not just Toronto. And if this starts, we start piecemealing this out and taking Toronto out of the OMB, when do we take Barrie out of the OMB, and how does that discussion happen? When does it happen with Owen Sound? When does it happen with Burlington? When does it happen with Oshawa? When does it happen with Ottawa, Kingston, any of these other cities? And how does it happen? And are we going to have an equal playing field with municipalities who don't have all the resources in place that are similar to Toronto or Barrie? It just doesn't work if you don't have a system in place. And that's where I think this bill is a little bit lacking, although I do appreciate the spirit of it and actually quite agree with the spirit of it. I think the execution of it can be needs to be much broader. And I look forward to hearing more in the debate, and certainly look forward to, as the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs mentioned, a really wholesome review. And I hope they're serious about that across the floor, that they actually do plan on reviewing the OMB and making sure that there are discussions that happen that are meaningful, that will help cities make good plans for the future and take into account that there are people who are duly elected to make these decisions and know their community better than any unelected official who's never even set foot in that community.
Hear, hear.
Thank
Well
you very
said.
much.
Thank you. For the debate, the member for Davenport.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm pleased to stand and join the debate here. I represent the riding of Davenport, a fine Toronto riding, and really happy to support this bill. For viewers tuning in from home, we're talking about the OMB, and specifically in Toronto today, the impacts here. And I want to congratulate my colleague from Trinity-Spadina, Mr. Marchese, who's been a strong advocate for our city for many, many years. And I also want to recognize folks who've come in to support this and push this issue forward. We can't do this good work without you. The member from Trinity-Spadina can do this work because you've organized and supported it. So thank you very much. The OMB is the provincial body, provincial agency. It's responsible for land planning, for settling land disputes. And I hear quite clearly in my riding of Davenport that constituents are fed up with the OMB. It has not served them very well. It's clear to me that this is an unaccountable body. It's an outdated body. It's obviously heavily favored in favor of the very wealthy, the wealthiest developers, the people with the deepest pockets, and this is obviously problematic for good planning, good public planning in our city. I heard the comments from the member from Barrie, and I agree that let's send this to committee and let's ask communities, let's ask for a debate and see how this works in other communities as well. I can tell you, from my perspective, in our city of Toronto, this makes a lot of sense. With the OMB, lack of accountability means there's nobody actually left on this board. And they then stay on for a long time, and it means that we don't have the kind of accountability that we'd see if city councillors had actual say on these issues. Councillors in Toronto have come out strongly in favour of this. They've asked to be freed from the OMB. A vote of 34 to 5 voted in favour of doing exactly what we've proposed here today. And so I think we should listen to them. And I think we have a problem with accountability in this province right now. We have a problem when it comes to casinos in this province right now. I know people in my community would really like a true consultation on that issue, and they'd get that through a referendum, which is something we've been advocating for. And this issue of unaccountable agencies is prevalent, and it's having impacts directly in my community. So we have the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Association, the agency there, and it acts more like an advocate for gambling, in my experience, at this point, than a regulator. And people in my community of Davenport feel like they are being forced into the idea of having more gambling in downtown Toronto, which feels unacceptable. We've also seen regulators like Canadian Nuclear Commission, which is a federal body, but at the same time, advocates for the nuclear industry, not advocating for safety in our community. And as a result, we have uranium processing happening right in our neighborhood. We've seen these agencies, how unaccountable they are. We have Orange right here. right? And so I think that the member from Trinity-Spadina has identified another agency that is not accountable, that's not meeting the needs of our community, and we need to deal with this. Lastly, I'd say in terms of this basket of agencies that are unaccountable, you know, we have Metrolinx, and we have Metrolinx that has not listened to our constituents in the West End when it comes to electrification of the air rail link, and in fact, we have members on the board there who are now advocating paid lobbyists for casinos in Toronto. So my constituents are saying we need to do better, we must do better, that we need planning that's in the public interest, and this shouldn't be left to just people with the deepest pockets on the OMB. And it's, you know, it is not just a Toronto issue. You know, I've been around this province and seen the impacts when it comes to urban sprawl, and we need to deal with this. So we can do better, and I'm going to leave some time for my colleagues who also want to speak to this issue. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Further debate, the Minister of Labour.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I'm very happy to speak on this issue. It's a very important issue for my community in Ottawa, and I've for some time been working along with my community in ways that we can reform OMB because it is very much needed. I appreciate the bill from member Trinity-Spadina. Obviously, it does not do anything for my city, but here's some challenges, and I want to suggest how we can improve OMB process. The challenge, I think, with Mr. Marchese's bill is that abolition of OMB does not help, because if there's a decision of City Council that has to be challenged, then we're going to the courts. And courts are more expensive, take a longer time, and there's no expertise. And by the way, judges are unelected as well, and faceless as well, and they're appointed as well. So the difference is minimal. So that's a significant challenge. Clearly, status quo does not work. We need to reform the OMB. As to the local appeal body scenario that the member opposite have suggested, well, that already exists in the Planning Act. So you really don't need this particular bill, because if City of Toronto wants to opt out of OMB and resort to LA Local Appeals Board, they have that opportunity right now under the Planning Act to do so. What I think needs to be done, and what I've suggested in my community, and we actually held a community summit on this where almost about 100 people came and attended, is that what we need to do is we have to level the playing field, Speaker, within the OMB, and we need to create a system that allows for more community-inspired development. So here's my very quick 4 suggestions, and I'm sure there's maybe other ways, but this is what my community and I think is a way to do things. One, what we need to do is encourage more development of community design plans. Communities spend a lot of time with the municipalities to develop community design plans, or CDPs. I know in Ottawa that has been used quite often. What we need to do then is incorporate those CDPs, once they're approved by the council, into the official plan of the city, so they become enforceable as opposed to just an aspirational document. That's number one. Number two, I think we need to change the appeal mechanism, or the way OMB works today, where it's a hearing from the beginning, to more a process where it's a judicial review, that they can only overturn a municipal council decision if there is an egregious error council has made. That will require the planning department and the councillors to work together to make sure that they come up with coherent decisions, as opposed to wink, wink, nudge, nudge political decisions, because they can point to OMB for overturning. And that happens often, not only in Toronto, not only in Ottawa, in the municipal councils across the province. Number 3 thing we need to do is require mandatory mediation at OMB. It's voluntary mediation right now, and every time there's mediation, the chances are very high the process results in a win-win solution for the community and for the developer and for the city council. So I think what we need to do is have mandatory mediation within OMB, so that we can make the process less litigious, less adversarial, and focus on common solutions. Lastly, in order to have a level playing field, we need to have legislation, something that will prevent strategic litigation against public participation. In the last session of the Parliament, I tabled an anti-SLAPP bill, Bill 132, and I encourage folks who are here to look at it. That will allow that developers are not using tools to suppress communities when they want to talk about issues that are important. I'll stop right here, but this is an important issue, and I appreciate the member for bringing the matter forward.
Thank you. For the debate, the member for Burlington.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm pleased today to rise to speak to the legislation brought forward by the member from Trinity-Spadina, Bill 24, the Respective Municipalities Act, City of Toronto 2013. Earlier this week, the media reported that Toronto's population has just surpassed that of Chicago. We are currently standing in the 4th largest city on the continent. Los Angeles is still a ways off, but our California friends shouldn't get too complacent. That's just one measure of the energy and vitality we have come to expect of Canada's largest city, and it certainly doesn't come as a surprise. This is a city that punches above its weight, even in a province struggling with enormous challenges. But of course, Toronto is still a work in progress, and we believe that its best days are ahead of it. The city faces a number of hurdles as it evolves, and they are too numerous to list in my allotted time, as the member from Trinity-Spadina may agree. But in a broad brush sense, it's safe to say that development is a key concern. The OMB is a mechanism that's part of the planning arsenal. It's mainly an appeals body for municipal planning decisions. It allows communities to challenge developers' proposals, and it allows developers to challenge municipalities' decisions. But it also allows citizens to appeal a council's decision that they can oppose. The OMB can rule either way, or it can choose a third path of its own design. That is obviously a lot of power. And no surprise, it has made the OMB a target for a lot of criticism. Currently, local decisions on a planning matter, including zoning bylaws and development approvals within Toronto's boundaries, can be appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board. Bill 20 would allow the City of Toronto to assume authority for all of those matters. Instead of the OMB, they would be a local appeals board created within the intention of resolving all planning disputes. The theory is that this would level the playing field and allow the appeal of citizens and city planners to be on the same footing as those of developers. But even if you take cash out of the equation, my guess is that developers are often the most familiar when it comes to the ins and the outs of planning legislation, regulation, and zoning. Maybe you'd never arrive at a totally neutral playing field. All things being equal, the system would put power primarily in the hands of seasoned city planners, but reality is rarely that tidy. There is no doubt that the OMB has its flaws. There is no doubt that it regularly creates considerable friction and frustration for municipalities, developers, and residents alike. Incidentally, that is just another reason why the Ontario PCs believe all government agency boards and commissions should be reviewed to ensure that all giving taxpayer value for money, the OMB should be part of this process. Would Bill 20 solve those headaches or just move them to a new venue? I don't know, Speaker. The bill before us today is definitely a valuable springboard to an important discussion, but province-wide discussions has to precede legislation like this, so regrettably I cannot support this bill.
Thank you. The member for Beaches East York.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I stand here in support of this bill. It is no surprise that the City of Toronto has voted 34-5, for the abolition of the OMB. It is no surprise that the City of Mississauga has voted unanimously to abolish the OMB. And it will be no surprise to me or any of the members in here that every single town and city above a certain size will vote to follow suit. That's exactly what's going to happen if you allow this bill to go forward. Whether it's Barrie, whether it's Aurelia, whether it's Burlington, it's going to happen. And I will tell you that, it has been my experience, both as a councillor, as a mayor, and as an MPP, that this is a board that ought not to be there. I've seen what it has done to destroy communities. I have seen what it did to destroy the Leaside property owners when I was mayor of East York. I have seen what it has done to destroy the people who live on Glen Davis Ravine and Beaches East York, who now have a bill of about $100,000 they're struggling to pay. I have seen what the OMB has done to the people in the beach who are struggling to try to find the money and the wherewithal to take on big development money. I recall the chair of the Ontario Municipal Board before a committee of this legislature coming in and brazenly stating that she was asked, "What is your mandate?" And she stated, "My mandate is to facilitate the development industry in this province. That's what she said her job was. She believed it with all of her heart. Her job was not to look after communities. It was not to stand up for municipalities. It was to facilitate the development industry. And that's in fact what is happening. You know, I recall that the legislature debated this whole thing about the OMB in 2005, and we did not do the right things. We had a majority government that saw fit to do other things, such as put in weak words like have regard to, which the courts have interpreted exactly as they have, that they took away the right of appeal of ordinary citizens who had not participated up until the time of the OMB hearing. They narrowed the focus on what could be argued by applicants. They allowed greater use of SLAP so that citizens could be put in fear, and they withdrew ministerial accountability to reverse the OMB so that the minister and that government today has no authority over an unelected body. Today, the residents are cowering and they're fighting and they have rearguard actions. You know, there are visioning studies in my riding as well, as the member from Ottawa Centre talked about. There are visioning studies, but they are ignored. There are planning studies, they are ignored. The costs are prohibitive to ordinary people. You know, the expertise of neighbourhoods and what it's like in their neighbourhood is completely ignored. City Council is completely ignored. And the cities themselves, think about the cities in which you live. We're all trying to help them. They're having an equally hard time as we are balancing the budget. The City of Toronto alone spends millions upon millions of dollars defending its decisions before the OMB each and every year. You know, and they have legal counsel, they have planners, they have people that they have to bring in to fight these, and they're not listened to at all because the OMB is now brazen to the point that they argue minimal deference, and the courts have ruled they don't have to listen to what the elected representatives or the neighbours or anyone except the developers has to say. I ask the Conservatives to think about what you're doing here today, because I have listened intently to the leader of the Conservative Party over these last many months, and he's talking about getting rid of useless boards and commissions. If ever there was a useless board and commission, this is it. If you're not willing to get rid of this useless board and commission, then don't start talking about getting rid of some of the others, because the city knows they can go without it. The City of Mississauga and Hazel McCallion knows they don't need it either. The City of Barrie knows you don't need it, and I will tell you that the citizens of this province know you don't need it either. Please allow this to go to committee, allow it to be heard, allow your own municipalities to tag along if they want, and please, please give the authority back to ordinary people. That's where it should be, not in an unelected body. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to thank my neighbour and my friend, the member for Trinity-Spadina, for bringing this forward. I just want to say two things. One, I will vote for and enthusiastically support his private member's bill. The second thing I'd like to say is, beyond that, I think significant reform of the OMB of this nature and respecting the City of Toronto to give it this option is really critical, and I look forward to working with you in the coming months to try and do this, and hopefully before we face the electorate again, we will actually have something to show for it. I also want to thank my Premier. Premier Wynne has asked us on this side of the House to be less partisan. And she has said this in this House many times, that private members' business is almost when we're a City Council. We set aside our partisan differences. We don't bring political rhetoric, and at least we're trying not to on this side. We show each other the kind of respect that those of us in municipal government have shown. And I want to thank the member because I listened to his speech and it was nonpartisan, it was practical, and it addressed the people's business. So my hat is off to you, my friend. So, you know, I have to tell you, I lived, as some of you have teased me about, been the mayor of a city that is the capital city of the next city over. Miraculously, we don't have an OMB. We didn't have an MBB. And the world didn't fall apart. Development happened. Developers were happy. It wasn't anti-development, which is the thing I said. How you don't have an OMB, all of a sudden you're going to kill development, and communists will take over and will nationalize the banks, or we'll have us, Hugo Chavez will come back to life or something. It is so ridiculous that places like Alberta have perfectly fine development in beautiful cities, and Vancouver doesn't have a municipal board like this and is rated one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Mr. Speaker, when I was mayor, we passed our official plan. I would like to say to my friends at Toronto City Council, as the Minister of Aboriginal, can you learn how to pass an official plan? I have to tell you, it's very hard to be a downtown resident when my City Council and Mayor can't figure out how to pass an official plan. I have 47 condo towers going up at a level of development. My constituency is at 200% the intensity targets out of places to grow, 20 years ahead of schedule. A big part of that responsibility is on the shoulders of the city government that isn't doing its job. We don't even have a secondary plan, which is what we used to have. So I want them to actually take that responsibility seriously and not blame us or the OMB. On the same hand, we have to take responsibility for ourselves here. We used to we do first reading of our official plan at Winnipeg. We would then send it to the Minister of Municipal Affairs, who would then review it. It would go to Cabinet, commentary would be taken, it would be then amended and sent back to the city. There was a time frame and penalties if the province and the city didn't get the official plan done. The City Council would then debate second reading, make amendments, address the proposed amendments by the province at a macro level, pass second reading, send it back. If there was an unresolvable issue, it was then referred to that municipal board, which only did hearings of the official plan and major consequential amendments. I think that's how it works in 8 out of 10 provinces. It is very simple, and then the municipality creates its own appeals. Calgary, Winnipeg, Halifax, much smaller but important capital cities and others all have their own appeals process, Mr. Speaker. I think we the folks in Toronto, are as intelligent and as capable as any other group of folks to do that. And developers actually are thriving. The rules are predictable. The process is that. I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, having sat through OMB hearings, it is a machine for consultants to make money. You bill $500 an hour, lawyers love it, planners love it, architects love it. No one makes more money. I mean, we could save everybody in business. All that money could actually go have architecture designing buildings, planners planning cities, and builders and citizens doing that. I am tired of my constituents having to give up their Sundays to fight local development. I and my city councillors, Kristen Wantam and Paul McConnell, have a website called TorontoCenterPlan.org, where we are doing our own 11 community plans together. My constituents have already articulated the kind of view that they want. Mr. Speaker, to realize places to grow, we've got to have not a neutral system, but a system that works to align with government policies. You have my support. Thank you for your leadership, my friend. Thank you.
Further debate? The member for Durham.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the member from Trinity-Spadina. He's a good friend of mine. I think this is a reasonable proposal for a discussion during private members' time. I think it's important to put it in context, and we're not talking about the 444 municipalities in the province.
Are you sure? Because I had time left when the member from Burlington spoke. Yeah, there was 3 minutes. That's what I was telling him. Just hang on till we correct it. Okay. Well, you could take about 30 seconds off. He spoke for a while. Okay, the member from Durham, you can resume.
Flexible. If you'd like to put 4 up there, that's fine. The context of this is that the City of Toronto is no ordinary city. Respectfully, Mr. Marchese represents part of that. The city is 179 years old. It has a population of 2+, maybe 2.5 million people, and in fact, it's been just determined to be the 4th largest city in North America. I think it's important to recognize that it's larger than many of the provinces in Ontario, many of the eastern provinces and some of the western provinces as well. So in that context, now further context to this is that the current government under the McGuinty, and I'm not sure if it was the previous speaker, but they did, under the City of Toronto Act, have an opportunity to look at creating some tools for the City of Toronto, but I believe they failed to do so. They were afraid to give the City of Toronto
because then it would be another level of government. You got the federal, provincial, now there'd be the City of Toronto, which would be, some would argue, its own province. So they don't want to give any of the taxing tools away from the important City of Toronto, and too much flexibility. Now, my only concern with this bill, and I have read it, it amends almost everything in legislation that affects a city. And I think just in the few minutes, I think I have an extra minute left. The City of Toronto Act is amended, the Condominium Act, Consolidated Hearing Act, Development Charges Act, the Funeral, Burial and Cemeteries Act, the Ontario Heritage Act, the Planning Act itself. All of those are basically repealed. Those are instruments of the province to manage growth and where growth should occur. I believe if you fail to have the OMB, what happened before the OMB? These went to litigation in the courts. And that's why they brought the OMB in years ago. In fact, in my municipality, I did serve as a councillor and a regional councillor for a few years. I see it as a thorn in the side. And I think if I want to refer to the Minister of Municipal Affairs this morning in the article in the paper, Mr. Jeffries said the Liberal government is keeping its mind open. That's kind of like a pass in my view. But I did hear Mr. Murray, who's been a minister and he's been a mayor and he's got some background, and I think it's a reasonable advice that he gives the House. This should probably go under this government to a further review of the Ontario Municipal Board. I agree with that fully, and I think you have to put it in context of a larger reform. Mississauga is opposed to it, and who isn't opposed to it? But do they have the resources to properly manage the rights of applicants to make application for changes or amendments to the official plan? So in that context, this is an important discussion. In fact, today I would say, in fairness, we've had three very strong private members' bills. What's important here, too, is how members are whipped to vote. I see almost every NDP members here have been whipped. I can put to you, it'll probably be a recorded vote. I'm very interested in how the Liberals will vote on it, to be honest. And I think it's important, take the politics out of it, and I will say to you, let's go on and get on with business, and this needs to be reformed.
Further debate, the member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to speak in favour of the member from Trinity-Spadina's bill. Long overdue. I remember when I was first elected about 6.5 years ago, I brought in a bill that was very similar on behalf of Active 18,
Order, please.
which was from the great riding of Davenport. It wasn't even my own riding, but in those days, Mr. Speaker, in Davenport, they didn't have such enlightened leadership. So we in the New Democratic Party had to step in and defend them in front of the OMB and the government, which we did. And we called then for reform of the OMB. So 10 years, we've had our friends across the aisle, 10 years. We need reform of the OMB now. And I would suggest to everyone here, your good suggestions, there are some good suggestions, bring them to the committee, put them forward as amendments. That's how the House is structured. And I appreciate the support, because I've been to the OMB too many times with community groups. And you have a community group who took a day off work with absolutely no resources and no lawyer, up against developers with lawyers and planners at their beck and call, who are paid to be there. This is not a fair fight. And not only that, but to make it worse, then you get slap suits. Then you get the developers going after people who have cost them money to even appear at the OMB. So you're not even safe. Even if you win, even if you lose, you're not safe as a community group in front of the Ontario Municipal Board. So absolutely, whether it's abolished or whether it's reformed, certainly, at the very least, this bill needs to pass. At the very least, we need to get it out of Toronto. Toronto has its own planning board, has its own appeal process. Why should we be spending hard-earned dollars to go up to the OMB when we've already made informed decisions at the city level? So again, all of us have been in this position of defending our groups in our communities against large forces before a dysfunctional tribunal at the Ontario Municipal Board. It's time. It's time. It's been 10 years. Liberal rule, 10 years to get things done. We need it done now. It's been 6 years of bills like this being brought forward to reform the OMB. We need to come together, vote for it, pass the members' bill from Trinity-Spadina, and let's get on with having a vibrant, better, not ordinary city in Toronto, but extraordinary city in Toronto. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Order. Order, please. I know members are coming back into the... Members are all strolling back into the chamber, but as you do, there's about 20 conversations. I would ask you to try and give the Speaker a little bit of respect. The member for Trinity-Spadina, you have 2 minutes for response.
It's plus, Speaker. The clock was running, remember? All right. I just want to say I appreciate the comments made by Minister of Transportation, because I thought he was dead on, and he was speaking to my bill, in fact. And I want to say to the others, to the other two ministers, they were arguing in a way that doesn't support my bill. I believe that we can reform the OMB, and it should be reformed. My sense is most Liberals don't want to abolish it the way the member from Eglinton Lawrence wanted to. But reform must happen. Michael, please. Reform must happen.
Order.
But it's not incompatible with my bill. My bill says Toronto wants to be free of the OMB. They want to be exempt from the oversight of the OMB. These two issues are not incompatible. The City of Toronto is unique. It has its own act. You gave them fiscal powers to be able to tax whatever the heck they wanted. They are able to do whatever they believe they should be doing. And having planning powers is something that I believe we should give the City of Toronto if that's what they want, and that's what they want. If Mississauga wants to have the same power, I say God bless, and let's do it right away. If Ottawa wants to do it, I say God bless, let's do it right away. If all of the cities, major cities in Ontario want this, I think that's okay. And at the same time, let's reform the OMB, which is what the Premier wants, which is what she wanted to do when she was a minister, and nothing has happened. Charles Sousa was saying just about 6 months ago, whatever changes you were expecting to happen at the OMB, they're coming today. They're not coming. They're still not coming. The City of Toronto is 179 years old. They are an adult. They are mature. The time has come for the City of Toronto to be able to govern itself over planning. They do have an official plan, in spite of what the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs was saying earlier. They want to be able to be in charge of that official plan. Let's do it.
Thank you. The time for private